If you dance this tango, I'll marry you. Marcus Whitfield shouted to the entire Manhattan mansion, pointing at Rachel while the elite New York guests burst into cruel laughter. The 34-year-old cleaning lady stood there, in the middle of the Whitfield family's gilded hall, holding the shards of crystal from the Ming vase she had just accidentally broken. Her hands were shaking not from fear, but from a contained anger that had been simmering for years working for that family of arrogant bankers. "Look at her," sneered Stephanie Whitfield, the millionaire's wife, adjusting her pearl necklace while filming with her cell phone. "A Jewish maid thinking she can be in the same environment as us." The 200 guests at the 25th wedding anniversary party laughed even louder. Senators, federal judges, Wall Street CEOs, all united in a symphony of prejudice elegantly disguised as entertainment. Rachel had worked discreetly in that house for 5 years, always invisible, always humiliated, but had never been publicly exposed like this. The party had cost over $500,000. Imported orchids decorated every table, champagne circulated freely among the guests who represented the richest 1% in America. Rachel knew every detail of those exorbitant expenses, because she was the one who cleaned up the invoices that Marcus left lying around the office. She knew every corner of that mansion, every secret whispered in the corridors, every private telephone conversation that Marcus thought no one heard. For years, she had cleaned up evidence of corruption, organized dirty business documents, and listened in on conversations that could bring down governments. "What kind of circus is this?" muttered Senator Davidson. "Waitresses trying to match wits with us? They know their place, these people." Marcus, drunk on power and Scotch whiskey, continued his show of cruelty. At 52, heir to a banking fortune built on decades of exploitation, he lived for moments like this, where he could demonstrate his superiority in front of his peers. "Seriously, if that person can tango better than my wife, I'll drop everything and marry her." The crowd was hysterical now. Cell phone flashes began to capture the moment, turning Rachel's humiliation into viral entertainment for the elite. "You're being ridiculous, darling," said Stephanie, still filming. "That woman can probably barely walk properly, let alone dance. People like that have no culture, no class. Just look at those calloused hands." Rachel never imagined that her life of domestic invisibility would end like this, in the spotlight of the elite who had always treated her like furniture. For 5 years, she woke up at 5 a.m. to make coffee, cleaned marble bathrooms, and served dinner to people who talked about her as if she didn't exist. "Accept it soon so we can get it over with," shouted someone from the audience. "We want to see failure. These people need to know their place in society." The humiliation grew like a wave. Whispered anti-Semitic comments spread through the crowd like poison. "Typical of these people, always trying to take advantage," muttered the federal judge's wife. No shame in that. But something strange began to happen. Instead of shrinking back, as everyone expected, Rachel began to straighten up. Her shoulders aligned, her breathing calmed, and her eyes took on an intensity that no one in that room had seen before. For 5 years, she had been the ghost of that house, witnessing conversations that would reveal billionaire schemes. She knew about Marcus' offshore accounts, about the bribes paid to politicians, about the frauds that financed that mansion. But there was something more. Something that not even the Whitfields had discovered about who Rachel really was before she knocked on their door looking for work. "I accept," Rachel finally said, her voice cutting through the noise like a sharp blade. The hall fell completely silent. Even the orchestra stopped playing. Some guests exchanged confused glances. There was something about Rachel's posture that didn't fit the image of a defeated cleaner. Marcus blinked several times, thinking he had heard wrong. "What did you say?" "I accept your challenge," Rachel repeated, now more firmly. "But when I dance better than your wife, you'll keep your word, even if it was meant as a joke." The unwavering confidence in Rachel's voice made some of the guests exchange uncomfortable glances. There was something there that didn't add up. Her shoulders straightened, her posture changed, and for a fleeting moment, she no longer looked like the same person who cleaned toilets every morning. Marcus was studying Rachel more closely now. There was something familiar in those eyes, in that upright posture, in that confidence that seemed to come from a source much deeper than simple stubbornness. What no one in that gilded hall could have imagined was that Rachel Goldstein held secrets about who she really was before she became invisible in that house. Secrets that would turn those laughs into nightmares, and that would turn the night of humiliation into the beginning of a revenge that Manhattan's elite would never forget. There, in the face of all the scornful looks, she stood firm, like someone keeping a secret too powerful to reveal before the time was right. If you like this story of justice and reversals, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple cleaning lady was about to turn the tables on those who had always underestimated her. Marcus exchanged a complicit glance with Stephanie. That smug cleaning lady was about to humiliate herself in a way that would be remembered for decades in Manhattan's social circles. He could already imagine the Instagram posts, the memes, the videos going viral with cruel hashtags. DJ, put on the hardest tango you've got, Marcus ordered, walking to the center of the room like a Roman emperor about to watch gladiators tear each other apart. I want to see this artist trying to keep up with something that requires years of training. Stephanie strategically positioned herself to get the best angle. Honey, when she fails, I want you to fire her in front of everyone. It'll be a lesson to all the employees who think they can match us. The guests arranged themselves in a perfect circle, like vultures around a carcass. Senator Morrison adjusted his tie, clearly enjoying himself. This is going to be better than any Broadway show. I love it when these people learn their place in the social hierarchy. The CEO of Peterson Industries laughed out loud. Marcus, you should charge admission for this kind of entertainment. The elite need these moments of enlightenment about class differences. But as everyone prepared for the humiliation show, Rachel remained motionless in the center of the runway. Her eyes showed no nervousness or regret. On the contrary, there was a disturbing serenity, as if she was exactly where she had always known she should be. For 5 years, she had cleaned that house in silence, listening to Marcus brag about his dirty dealings, watching Stephanie squander fortunes on futility while entire families lost homes because of her husband's banking schemes. She had organized documents that could send half of those guests to prison. Marcus had no idea that the simple cleaning lady had 3 university degrees, including an MBA in finance that she had obtained before losing everything in a financial crisis orchestrated by banks like his. He didn't know that she spoke 5 languages or that she had spent the last 5 years meticulously collecting evidence of every illegal transaction that passed through that house. Are you scared? Teased Stephanie, approaching with her iPhone cocked. There's still time to give up and apologize like a polite person should. Recognize that you crossed the line. Rachel finally spoke, her calm voice cutting through the laughter. I just have one question. When I win, and you keep your word to marry me, what happens to all those offshore accounts you keep in the Cayman Islands? Marcus' smile froze instantly. How on earth did a cleaning lady know about his secret accounts? Only 5 people in the world knew that information, and none of them were in that room. His heart began to race in a way it hadn't since his first fraudulent schemes. What are you talking about? He stammered, trying to keep his composure in the face of the guests' curious stares. Some senators exchanged uncomfortable glances. Offshore accounts were a delicate subject in any political circle. Oh, I'm sorry, said Rachel with an innocent smile that chilled Marcus' blood. It must have been my mistake. After all, I'm just an ignorant Jewish cleaner, aren't I? How could I know about $50 million transactions in tax havens? Stephanie felt a shiver of unease. There was something in the way Rachel pronounced those words that didn't sound like submission, but like a veiled threat. Marcus, let's get this over with. This woman is clearly delirious. The DJ, flustered by the growing tension, put on La Comparsita, one of the most technically challenging tangos in the classical repertoire. The music echoed through the hall like a harbinger of war, causing some guests to wriggle uncomfortably in their positions. Perfect, murmured Senator Morrison. When she fails at this song, it will be even more humiliating. No one can dance La Comparsita without years of professional training. Stephanie danced first, executing basic moves she had learned in expensive private lessons. She twirled and performed sensual poses that drew polite applause from the men present. When she had finished, she waved to the cameras like a celebrity, convinced of her inevitable victory. Your turn, waitress, she said dismissively, extending an ironic hand to Rachel. I hope you'll at least try to put on a decent show for all those cameras. But when Rachel moved to the center of the runway, something extraordinary happened. Her posture changed completely. Her shoulders aligned with an elegance that didn't match years of housework. Her hands found a gracefulness that seemed to have been sculpted by decades of training. Marcus felt his stomach contract. There was something terribly familiar about those movements, that posture, that quiet confidence. A memory began to form in his foggy mind, but he couldn't identify what. It was as if something buried long ago was trying to emerge. The first bars of the song began, and Rachel closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she was no longer the same person. It was as if a mask had fallen away, revealing something that had been hidden for a long time. His first steps were like a silent declaration of war. Each movement was precise, technically perfect, charged with a passion that mesmerized. It wasn't just dance, it was art in its purest form, performed by someone who had clearly dedicated years of his life to the technique. The laughter began to die down in the crowd. One by one, the guests stopped jeering and began to watch with a growing mixture of confusion and involuntary admiration. That hadn't been in their entertainment plans. With every step the music took, the silence in the hall became deeper. Rachel danced as if the music was part of her soul, as if each note had been composed specifically for her movements. It was a performance that transcended technique. It was pure artistic expression. Marcus swallowed. For the first time in his life, he began to suspect that he had seriously underestimated someone. And that the evening, designed to be his moment of cruel supremacy, was about to turn into something completely different. Stephanie stopped filming, her face paling as she realized that her own performance had been laughably amateurish compared to what she was witnessing. "This is impossible," she whispered to herself. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt had fueled a silent force growing exactly where they least expected it, and that Rachel's true identity was about to rewrite all the rules of the game they thought they completely controlled. When Rachel finished dancing, the silence in the hall lasted an eternity. It wasn't just the perfect technique or the passion that had mesmerized everyone, it was the complete transformation they had witnessed. The simple cleaner had turned out to be an artist of world-class caliber. Slowly, one person began to applaud. Then another. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet cheering a performance that rivaled any Broadway show. But Rachel remained motionless in the center of the dance floor, her eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him sweat. "That's impossible," muttered Stephanie, pale as paper. Her own performance had been ridiculously amateurish compared to this. Nobody learns to dance like that without years of professional training. Marcus felt something familiar in those movements, but he couldn't identify what. It was as if a memory buried decades ago was trying to emerge through the fog of time and alcohol. That's when a female voice echoed from the back of the room. "My God, it really is you." Everyone turned to see Elizabeth Morrison, dance critic for the New York Times and wife of the senator, walking towards Rachel with wide eyes. "Elizabeth, do you know this person?" asked Stephanie, clearly uncomfortable with the admiration in the critic's voice. Elizabeth completely ignored Stephanie and stopped in front of Rachel. Rachel Goldstein, the tango princess of Buenos Aires. She disappeared from the dance world 5 years ago after that fabricated scandal. Everyone wondered what had happened to you. The hall fell completely silent. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Goldstein. He knew that name. Rachel Goldstein had been one of the most promising dancers in the United States before. Before what? "You're wrong," said Rachel calmly. "I'm just a cleaning lady." "Nonsense," Elizabeth laughed, but not of debauchery, of genuine joy. "I've covered your career for years. You were the only American to win the World Tango Championship in Buenos Aires. Your performances at Lincoln Center were legendary." The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in Marcus' mind. 5 years ago, there had been a scandal involving a famous dancer accused of, what? Drugs? Fraud? He couldn't remember exactly, but he knew that her career had been destroyed overnight. "If she was so famous," interrupted Stephanie nervously, "what is she doing cleaning our house?" Elizabeth looked at Stephanie with the kind of disdain that elites usually reserved for domestic servants. Because she was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by powerful people who couldn't bear to see a Jewish woman of humble origins achieve such success in the art world. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Conspiracy. Powerful people. Suddenly, the cruel laughter from earlier in the evening seemed much less funny. Rachel finally spoke, her voice cutting through the silence. "Elizabeth, you've always been so kind to me. But that was a long time ago. I have other priorities now." "Like what?" Marcus asked, his voice betraying a growing nervousness. Rachel smiled for the first time in the evening, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to reveal a long-kept secret. How to ensure that certain injustices are finally put right. Marcus tried to laugh, but the sound came out forced. What kind of injustices? The kind that happens when corrupt bankers destroy the lives of entire families to increase their profits, Rachel replied calmly. The kind that happens when they bribe politicians to cover up their financial crimes. Senator Morrison choked on his champagne. What are you talking about? Rachel walked over to her handbag, which she had left on a chair in the corner of the room. For 5 years, she had carried that bag to work every day, containing much more than cleaning products. Can I ask you a question, Marcus? She said, taking a small digital recorder out of her bag. Do you remember a phone conversation you had last week about transferring $20 million from pension funds to your personal accounts? Marcus's face lost all color. That conversation had taken place in his private office, with the doors closed. There was no way anyone could have heard. Because I was cleaning your library when you made that call, Rachel continued. And I discovered that your intercom was malfunctioning, transmitting sound to the home security system. Sound that I had recorded religiously for 5 long years. Stephanie let out a muffled scream. Were you spying? I was working, Rachel corrected. Cleaning up the mess you were making, listening to you brag about stealing old people's pensions, destroying working families' lives, bribing judges, and recording every word. Marcus tried to advance towards Rachel, but his legs felt like they had turned to jelly. You can't prove anything. Rachel smiled again, that blood-curdling smile. Actually, I can. For 5 years, I didn't just record conversations. I photographed documents. I collected evidence. I organized everything methodically. She paused and looked around the room, at all those privileged faces that were now staring at her with a mixture of horror and fascination. And tomorrow morning, all of this will be handed over to the FBI, the Internal Revenue Service, and every major newspaper in the country. What no one in that room could have imagined was that Rachel hadn't just spent 5 years collecting evidence. She had meticulously prepared for this moment, building a network of contacts, strategic allies, and a revenge plan so elaborate that it would turn that night of humiliation into the first act of a justice that would reveal all the rot hidden behind Manhattan's gilded facades. And while Marcus finally began to understand the magnitude of what he had underestimated for 5 years, Rachel already knew that the real show was just beginning. Marcus tried to move towards the recorder, but Rachel calmly backed away. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Especially not in front of so many important witnesses. You're bluffing, said Marcus, but his voice trembled in a way that betrayed his growing desperation. A cleaner wouldn't have access to that kind of technology. Rachel laughed, not a cruel laugh, but that of someone who could finally reveal a long-kept secret. Marcus, did you really think that a world tango champion would become a cleaner without a plan? Elizabeth Morrison approached, her eyes shining with admiration. Rachel, did you organize all this? 5 years of meticulous preparation, confirmed Rachel. Every conversation recorded, every document photographed, every transaction documented. But best of all was discovering that Marcus wasn't just a thief, he was stupid enough to do it all in front of invisible furniture. Panic began to spread through the hall like fire through dry straw. Senator Morrison whispered urgently to his wife, "We need to get out of here. Now." But Rachel raised her voice. "Senator, why the rush? Especially considering that you appear on several of my recordings discussing how to hide illegal campaign donations from Russian companies." The man instantly paled. Around the hall, other guests began exchanging desperate glances, each wondering if their own private conversations had been captured. "This is blackmail," shouted Stephanie, but her bravado sounded desperate. "You can't use recordings made without consent." "Actually, I can," replied Rachel calmly. "Especially when they're made in my workhouse, where I had a legal right to be. And especially when they document federal crimes." Rachel took another device out of her purse. "Oh, and Judge Patterson, you might also be interested in hearing the recording where Marcus discusses how to bribe you with that $2 million consulting contract for his wife." The federal judge was livid. His wife began to cry silently, realizing that her career as a consultant was destroyed. Marcus finally exploded. "You bitch. I should have fired you years ago. I should have investigated who you were better." "Oh, but you did," said Rachel, pulling a folder out of her bag. "I have here the report you had done on me when you hired me. You discovered that Rachel Goldstein had disappeared after a scandal, without investigating further." She opened the folder and showed Elizabeth the documents. What Marcus didn't find out was that I didn't disappear out of shame. I disappeared because I was investigating who had orchestrated my destruction. Elizabeth picked up the documents, her eyes widening as she read. My God, Rachel. Here it all is: who paid for the false accusations, who bribed the press, who financed the destruction of my career because I was about to marry the son of one of your partners, Rachel added, looking directly at Marcus. Your father, to be specific. The room fell absolutely silent. Marcus was as white as paper. My father died 3 years ago, he muttered. Yes, but the men he paid to destroy me are still alive. And I've discovered that you've continued to use his same methods to eliminate problems. Rachel pulled out another tape recorder. Do you want to hear you planning to destroy the lives of those immigrant families who refused to sell the property you wanted? Marcus tried to deny it, but Rachel had already pressed play. Her own voice echoed through the hall. I don't care what needs to be invented. Planted drugs, immigration problems, anything. I want that family off that property in 30 days. Several guests began to move towards the exit, but Rachel raised her voice again. Oh, and for those who are thinking of leaving, I should mention that I've copied everything to a cloud system with automatic release in case something happens to me. The CEO of Peterson Industries tried a different approach. How much do you want? Everyone has a price. Rachel looked at him with pure disdain. Mr. Peterson, the man who fired 3,000 employees on Christmas Eve to increase his bonuses. Do you really think this is about money? Then what do you want? Shouted Stephanie in desperation. Justice, replied Rachel simply. Tomorrow morning, in addition to the evidence going to the authorities, an exclusive interview of me will be published in all the major newspapers, telling not just about my last 5 years as a cleaner, but about my true identity and how a conspiracy by the elite destroyed my career. Elizabeth picked up her phone. Rachel, I can help with that. I have contacts at all the major media outlets. Everything is already arranged, Rachel replied, including a documentary that will be released at the same time, showing how Manhattan's elite operate behind the scenes. Rachel continued, for 5 years, I documented not only the conversations, but also bank transfers, offshore accounts, tax evasion schemes, political bribes. I have receipts for payments to eliminate competitors, forged contracts, even evidence of how you manipulate local elections. Marcus collapsed into a chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had underestimated. Did you plan everything from day one? No, replied Rachel. On the first day, I just needed a job to survive. But when I realized who you really were, when I found out that it was your family that destroyed my life, then I meticulously planned every step. Stephanie, realizing that the ship was sinking, tried one last desperate gamble. Marcus, I can't be associated with this. She took off her engagement ring and threw it on the floor. Our engagement is off. What touching loyalty, Rachel observed dryly. Typical of the elite. United in cruelty, but every man for himself when the consequences arrive. As the masks fell and the truth emerged like an unstoppable storm, one question remained in the air. Would Marcus finally understand that he had underestimated not just a cleaning lady, but a force of nature in disguise who had patiently built her own redemption on the foundations of the arrogance of those who thought that power and money were enough to control anyone? 6 months later, Rachel Goldstein was on the main stage of Lincoln Center, receiving a standing ovation from 3,000 people after her comeback performance. The headline in the New York Times that day read, "The Phoenix of Tango, How a Cleaning Woman Brought Down an Empire of Corruption." The documentary The Silent Revenge had become the most watched in Netflix history, exposing not only Marcus' crimes, but an entire network of corruption involving dozens of powerful people. Rachel was no longer invisible. She was the most respected woman in Manhattan. Marcus, on the other hand, was serving a 15-year sentence for bank fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. His accounts had been frozen, his assets confiscated, and his mansion turned into a cultural center for low-income youth, an irony that didn't go unnoticed by the media. He tried to make me disappear for 5 years, Rachel said in her exclusive interview with CNN. So I decided to use those 5 years to make him disappear forever. The list of consequences for the guests at that party read like a revenge novel. Stephanie had lost all her Instagram followers after her racist posts were leaked, and was forced to work as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic in a small town. Senator Morrison resigned after recordings revealed his involvement in corruption schemes. Judge Patterson was compulsorily retired and was being prosecuted for malfeasance. Elizabeth Morrison continued to cover the career of Rachel, who had founded the Goldstein Foundation, an organization that offered full scholarships to young artists from underprivileged communities. The same foundation that now occupied the old Whitfield mansion, where more than 500 children received free dance, music, and theater lessons. Rachel had married David Chun, a human rights lawyer who had met her during the case against Marcus. Together, they lived in a comfortable apartment on the Upper West Side, nothing ostentatious, but full of love, music, and visiting children who came for free private lessons. "Sometimes people ask me if I feel remorse," Rachel said during her talk at Harvard University to an audience of 2,000 students. "But how can you feel bad for exposing criminals? For giving a voice to families that have been destroyed by greed?" The university audience gave her a standing ovation for 5 minutes. Among the students was a young woman who had lost her family home in one of Marcus' real estate scams. "Professor Rachel, thank you for giving us hope that justice still exists in this world." Rachel smiled, remembering herself from years ago. "Darling, learn one thing. The world doesn't give you what you deserve, but what you earn. And sometimes conquest requires strategic patience." Rachel's memoir, 5 Years of Silence, A Life of Justice, had become an international bestseller, translated into 23 languages. The film rights were sold for $10 million, which he donated in full to organizations fighting financial crime. Marcus, in his cold gray cell, had limited access to the internet, but he learned about Rachel's success from other prisoners who watched her interviews on ordinary prison television. He had lost 30 kilos, developed an ulcer, and spent sleepless nights, knowing that every day of Rachel's success was a reminder of his own downfall. His cellmate, a former accountant who admired Rachel, made a point of commenting on her every TV appearance. "Look how radiant she is today. She must be making a fortune with those lectures." The last time anyone saw him cry was during Rachel's television interview where she said, "Marcus thought that power and money were enough to control anyone. But he forgot that some people have something money can't buy: dignity, intelligence, and an infinite patience to see justice triumph." The Whitfield banking empire was broken up and sold off. The 3,000 families who had lost their homes in their fraudulent schemes received millions in compensation. Employees who survived the investigations told stories about how Marcus treated employees, stories that Rachel had documented during her 5 invisible years. Rachel created a TV show called Invisible Justice, where she told stories of ordinary people who faced injustice and found creative ways to overcome it. The show became a worldwide phenomenon, inspiring millions of people not to accept humiliation in silence. One of the show's most moving stories was about Maria, a Latina cleaner who used secret recordings to expose sexual harassment in a large corporation, resulting in the arrest of the CEO and structural changes in the company. Today, when young artists face prejudice or humiliation, they remember Rachel Goldstein's story. The woman who turned 5 years of invisibility into the most elegant and effective revenge in modern New York history. 3 years after that party, Rachel returned to the Goldstein Cultural Center for a special performance. In the same hall where she was humiliated, she danced again, this time for 300 children from underprivileged communities who applauded as if they were watching magic happen. Among the children was Joshua, a 12-year-old boy who had lost his home when Marcus defrauded his family's mortgage. Now Joshua was learning the violin for free at the foundation, dreaming of playing in the New York Philharmonic. The moral of the story echoed in every lecture, every interview, every performance. True revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so great that they spend the rest of their lives knowing that they underestimated the wrong person. Rachel proved that justice sometimes takes time, but when it comes with compound interest. She turned humiliation into motivation, invisibility into power, and 5 years of silence into a lifetime of impact. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to be patient to see justice triumph? Tell us your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that show that intelligence and perseverance always win out over arrogance and prejudice.